Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. So this happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still getting a kick out of thinking about it. I figured this community would appreciate the absolute beautiful chaos that unfolded when someone decided to power trip on the wrong person. Let me start with some background. I work in tech, and over the past 15 years, I've been lucky enough to build and sell a couple of companies. Nothing too flashy, but it's given me the freedom to invest in other businesses and basically do whatever interests me. One thing that's always bugged me is how some places think expensive automatically means pretentious, and how they treat people based on appearances rather than actual respect. About 8 months before this incident, my investment group had been looking into acquiring a struggling restaurant chain called the Sterling Group. These weren't your typical chain restaurants, mind you. We're talking about high-end establishments in major cities, the kind of places that charge $60 for a steak and have wine lists thicker than phone books. The problem was, they were hemorrhaging money faster than a broken fire hydrant. The numbers told the whole story. Occupancy rates had dropped nearly 40% over 2 years. Customer reviews were getting worse, and staff turnover was through the roof. After doing our research, it became pretty clear that the issue wasn't the food quality or the locations, it was management. These places had become so obsessed with maintaining this artificial image of exclusivity that they'd forgotten the basic principle of hospitality, which is making people feel welcome while they're spending their hard-earned money. I remember one particularly telling Yelp review that mentioned how a customer's teenage son was made to feel unwelcome because his dress shoes weren't the right shade of black. Another review talked about how a woman celebrating her anniversary was asked to cover her small wrist tattoo because it didn't align with their standards. This wasn't hospitality, it was gatekeeping, and it was killing their business. But here's the thing about struggling businesses, they often have good bones underneath all the problems. The Sterling Group had prime real estate, solid kitchen equipment, and despite everything, some really talented chefs and servers who were just trying to do their jobs. The flagship location, which everyone called the Sterling Room, was particularly beautiful. Classic architecture, gorgeous bar area, private dining rooms that were perfect for business meetings. It just needed leadership that understood the difference between maintaining standards and being pretentious jerks. The acquisition process had been moving along smoothly, though these things always take months of legal back and forth. We were maybe 2 weeks away from finalizing everything when this story takes place. I had scheduled a meeting with our legal team to review the final purchase agreement and discuss some immediate changes we wanted to implement once the deal closed. Now, I should mention something about how I dress. I've never been big on traditional business attire. Life's too short to spend it uncomfortable, and after you've made enough money, you realize that wearing a suit doesn't actually make you more intelligent or professional. My usual outfit consists of well-made but comfortable clothes. That particular evening, I was wearing dark designer jeans, a black t-shirt that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month, a tailored blazer, and my favorite pair of sneakers. Not just any sneakers, mind you. These were a limited edition designer athletic shoes that cost about $800 and looked like they belonged in a modern art museum. I also wore my everyday watch, which is admittedly a bit flashy. It's a custom piece that cost more than most people's cars, but unless you really know watches, it just looks like a nice timepiece. The point is, my entire outfit probably cost more than what most people make in a month, but it definitely didn't look like traditional formal wear. The meeting was scheduled for 7:30 at the Sterling Room. I arrived about 20 minutes early because I wanted to scope out the dinner crowd and get a feel for how the place was operating. This was supposed to be their busiest night of the week, but when I walked in, the restaurant was maybe half full at best. Not a great sign for a supposedly exclusive establishment on a prime evening. The hostess was polite enough, though she did give my outfit a once-over that lasted a bit too long. I explained that I was waiting for colleagues to arrive for a private dining room reservation. She showed me to the bar area and said someone would be with me shortly. The bar itself was genuinely impressive. Beautiful dark wood, excellent lighting, and a back bar display that must have had thousands of dollars worth of premium spirits. I ordered a whiskey, pulled out my tablet, and started reviewing the contract documents while I waited. The bartender was professional and didn't seem to care about what I was wearing, which I appreciated. For about 15 minutes, everything was fine. I was reading through legal language, occasionally taking notes, and generally minding my own business. The few other people at the bar were having quiet conversations, and the atmosphere was exactly what you'd want from a high-end establishment. Then this guy approached me. I noticed him before he said anything, because he had this way of carrying himself that screamed middle management with a superiority complex. Perfectly pressed suit, shiny shoes, and this expression like he was personally offended by something. His name tag identified him as Director of Guest Experience, though I didn't catch his actual name at first. He walked right up to me with this practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes and said he needed to have a word with me about the restaurant's dress code. The way he said it made it clear this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. I looked up from my tablet and gave him my attention, figuring maybe there was some kind of misunderstanding. The guy gestured toward my feet and explained that athletic footwear, regardless of brand or price point, violated their strictly enforced dress code policy. He said this was disrupting the ambiance for other guests and that I would need to either change my shoes or leave the premises. I have to admit I was more confused than annoyed at first. I looked around the half-empty restaurant and wondered exactly which ambiance I was disrupting. Then I explained, as politely as I could, that I was waiting for a business meeting that would be moving to one of the private dining rooms shortly. I mentioned that the restaurant seemed to have plenty of available space, so I wasn't sure how my presence was causing any real problems. That's when his attitude really came out. This guy, who I later learned was named Chad, because of course he was, got this condescending tone and started lecturing me about how people who truly belonged in establishments like this understood and respected the standards. He said something about how these rules existed to maintain the level of clientele they wanted to attract, and that exceptions couldn't be made just because someone thought they were special. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a mid-level manager at a failing restaurant talking down to someone who was about to buy the place because of a pair of shoes that cost more than he probably made in a week. But he didn't know that, and honestly, it shouldn't have mattered anyway. I tried one more time to be reasonable. I explained that I understood they had policies, but that I was here for a brief business meeting and would appreciate a bit of flexibility. I even offered to move to the private dining area immediately if that would help resolve the situation. Chad wasn't having it. In fact, my attempt to be reasonable seemed to make him more determined to flex whatever authority he thought he had. He started talking louder, clearly wanting other people to notice what was happening. He called over one of the servers and instructed them to escort me out of the restaurant immediately. The server looked uncomfortable as hell, which I completely understood. This was probably not how they wanted to spend their evening, dealing with their manager's power trip. I felt bad for them, honestly. But this was where Chad made his biggest mistake. As the server approached, clearly reluctant to actually remove a paying customer, Chad added something that really set me off. He said something about how if I couldn't afford proper shoes for a place like this, maybe I should consider dining somewhere more appropriate to my budget. That was it. That was the moment this stopped being a minor inconvenience and became personal. I stood up calmly, pulled out my phone, and took a quick photo of Chad standing there in his perfectly pressed uniform with the nearly empty dining room visible in the background. Then I looked him directly in the eyes and said something I knew would either make him back down or double down on his stupidity. I told him I understood that he was very dedicated to enforcing rules and that I was about to make sure every single rule in this establishment was enforced to the absolute letter, starting with him. I suggested he had about 2 minutes to reconsider his decision before things got much more complicated for everyone involved. You know what he did? He laughed. Actually laughed like I was some kind of joke. Then he told the server to call security if I didn't leave immediately, and added something about how empty threats from disgruntled customers weren't going to change how they ran their business. The server, who was clearly mortified by this entire situation, apologetically explained that they needed me to leave. I could see in their face that they thought their manager was being ridiculous, but they obviously couldn't say that. So I thanked them for doing their job, told them this situation wasn't their fault, and walked toward the exit. As I was leaving, I could hear Chad making some comment to another staff member about how these types of situations were exactly why their dress code existed, to prevent people who didn't understand class from disrupting the experience for real customers. The timing of what happened next was absolutely perfect, because just as I stepped outside, my legal team was arriving for our meeting. 2 sharp, serious people in expensive suits carrying briefcases and looking exactly like what they were, high-powered attorneys handling a multi-million-dollar acquisition. They saw me standing outside and immediately knew something was wrong. When I explained what had just happened, I watched their expressions change from confusion to concern to something that might have been fear. See, here's what Chad didn't know. The acquisition was basically complete. We were literally just meeting to sign the final paperwork and discuss implementation strategies. As of that morning, I wasn't just some random customer. I was the new owner of the Sterling Group, including the restaurant that had just kicked me out for wearing $800 shoes. I looked at my lawyers and told them we had a change of plans. Before we finalized anything, we were going to implement something I'd been considering as a possible lesson for overly rigid management. I wanted to enact immediate enforcement of every single historical dress code policy in the Sterling Group Employee Handbook, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no exceptions whatsoever. One of the lawyers asked what I meant by historical policies. I explained that our due diligence research had uncovered some truly ridiculous employee dress code requirements that had been written years ago but weren't being enforced. Things like mandatory formal evening wear for all staff members, even when they were on break or working in areas customers couldn't see. Requirements that all shoes be leather-soled only, no rubber or synthetic materials. Policies about visible tattoos, hair colors, jewelry, everything you could imagine. The lawyers looked at each other with this expression that clearly said they thought I was losing my mind, but they also knew I was serious. One of them asked if I was sure I wanted to use my new authority for something this petty. I told them it wasn't petty. It was a lesson about the difference between maintaining standards and being a pretentious gatekeeper. Chad loved rules so much that he was willing to humiliate customers over arbitrary policies. Fine. Let's see how much he loved rules when they applied to him. Then I told them I also wanted Chad terminated for poor judgment and unprofessional conduct, effective immediately. We went back into the restaurant, but this time I walked straight past the hostess station toward the administrative offices that were part of the building. Chad was still near the bar area, probably feeling pretty pleased with himself for maintaining their precious standards. He didn't even notice me come back in. Within 30 minutes, my legal team had prepared and distributed an emergency memo to all Sterling Room staff. It announced the immediate termination of the Director of Guest Experience and the immediate implementation of comprehensive historical dress code enforcement for all employees. The memo was thorough. It outlined every ridiculous requirement that had been buried in their employee handbook. Formal evening wear during all shifts, including kitchen and maintenance staff. Leather-soled shoes only, no exceptions. No visible tattoos, piercings beyond basic ear piercings, or non-traditional hair colors. Specific requirements about jewelry, watches, and even things like nail polish colors. But here's the best part. The memo explained that these policies would be enforced exactly as written, which meant they applied 24 hours a day for any employee on the premises, even during breaks, training sessions, or administrative work. Watching the chaos unfold was absolutely beautiful. The head chef came out of the kitchen looking panicked because half his staff couldn't work in formal evening wear. How exactly do you prepare food while wearing a tuxedo jacket? The hostess was trying to figure out how to stand for 8 hours in formal heels. Several staff members had small tattoos that were suddenly policy violations. But Chad's reaction was the best part. When the general manager delivered the news that he was being terminated, he started arguing about his seniority, his dedication to maintaining standards, and how unfair it was to fire someone for doing their job. That's when one of my lawyers stepped in and explained that his dedication to rules was indeed admirable, which is why he would now be free to enjoy watching those same rules being enforced on everyone else as a former employee. The look on Chad's face when he realized what was happening was worth every penny this whole situation was going to cost. The restaurant descended into beautiful chaos. Service slowed to a crawl because servers couldn't move efficiently in formal wear while carrying heavy trays. The kitchen was a disaster because cooks couldn't do their jobs properly while dressed like they were attending a black tie gala. Customer wait times increased dramatically, and the few guests who were there started getting frustrated with the obviously struggling staff. Meanwhile, I went back to the bar wearing my exact same outfit and ordered another whiskey to watch the show. The general manager, who had always been professional and respectful during our previous interactions, approached me looking absolutely mortified. He started apologizing profusely for what had happened and tried to explain the chaos that was unfolding throughout the restaurant. I let him finish, then explained exactly who I was and what had just happened. I told him I bought this company because it was failing due to pretentious management that had lost sight of what hospitality actually meant. Chad loved rules so much that I decided to let him and everyone else experience just how much fun arbitrary, inflexible policies could be when taken to their logical extreme. But I'm not actually a monster, despite what this story might suggest. After watching the staff struggle for about an hour, I made an executive decision. The historical dress code enforcement would last for exactly one shift, just long enough for everyone to understand the point. After that, we would implement a sensible, professional uniform policy that prioritized comfort and efficiency over pretentious appearances. I also announced that the company would cover all costs for new uniforms and any other expenses related to this little lesson. The relief on the general manager's face was immediate. He started thanking me and asking about next steps for improving operations. I could see that he understood exactly what had just happened and why. By the end of the evening, word had spread throughout the entire staff about what had transpired. They learned that their new owner was someone who valued respect and professionalism, but who would also ruthlessly shut down entitled behavior and arbitrary gatekeeping. The servers who had been forced to escort me out earlier came over to apologize personally, though I made sure they understood that none of this was their fault. They were just trying to do their jobs in an impossible situation created by bad management. As I was getting ready to leave, I noticed one of the kitchen staff trying to carry a heavy box of supplies while wearing patent leather dress shoes and a formal jacket. The poor guy was clearly struggling, but he was trying to follow the temporary policy exactly as written. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to the general manager telling him to enjoy the lesson, that we'd discuss new uniform ideas the next day, and that my meal and drinks were on the house. I suggested he use the money that would have been my bill to buy coffee for all the staff who had dealt with this chaos. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that Chad was somewhere out there, probably telling people about how he got fired for maintaining standards without any awareness that his own inflexibility and poor judgment had been exactly the problem we were trying to solve. The next few weeks were incredibly telling about what had really been wrong with the Sterling Group. Word traveled fast in the restaurant industry, and the story of what happened that night became somewhat legendary among hospitality workers in the city. But more importantly, it sent a clear message to every employee about what kind of leadership they could expect going forward. Within days of implementing the new, reasonable dress code policy, I started seeing changes throughout the restaurant. Staff morale improved dramatically when people realized they could focus on doing their jobs well instead of worrying about arbitrary appearance standards. The servers were more comfortable, which meant they could provide better service. Kitchen staff could work efficiently without constantly adjusting formal wear that was never designed for physical labor. But the real test came when we started seeing the numbers. Customer reviews immediately began improving. People noticed that the staff seemed happier and more attentive. The atmosphere became more welcoming without losing any of the elegance that made the restaurant special in the first place. I remember one particularly telling review that appeared about 2 weeks after the incident. A customer wrote about how refreshing it was to visit an upscale restaurant where the focus was clearly on exceptional service and food quality rather than making people jump through hoops to prove they belonged there. They mentioned feeling welcomed from the moment they walked in, regardless of whether they were wearing a three-piece suit or nice casual wear. That review highlighted exactly what we'd been trying to accomplish. The Sterling Room was still elegant, still high-end, still a place for special occasions. But now it was also a place where people could relax and enjoy themselves without feeling like they were being judged by middle management wannabes. The general manager, who proved to be excellent once he didn't have to deal with Chad's nonsense, sent me regular updates about how operations were improving. Staff turnover dropped to almost nothing, which was huge for a restaurant. Training new servers and kitchen staff is expensive and time-consuming, so having people who actually wanted to stay made a massive difference to the bottom line. More interestingly, we started attracting a different type of customer. Word got out in the local business community that the Sterling Room had become a place where you could have serious conversations without worrying about artificial formality. We began seeing more tech entrepreneurs, creative professionals, and younger executives who had money to spend but didn't want to deal with stuffy, pretentious atmospheres. The private dining rooms, which had been underutilized because of the intimidating reputation the restaurant had developed, suddenly became popular for business meetings and celebrations. People realized they could bring clients or family members without worrying about whether everyone would be made to feel comfortable. About a month after the incident, I was having dinner at the Sterling Room with some investors when I overheard a conversation at the next table. A woman was telling her friend about how much she loved coming there now because the staff was so professional and welcoming. She mentioned that she used to avoid the place because it felt pretentious, but now it had become one of her favorite spots for important dinners. That conversation made me realize we'd accomplished exactly what we set out to do. We'd maintained the quality and elegance that made the restaurant special while eliminating the gatekeeping behavior that had been driving customers away. The financial turnaround was impressive. Within 3 months, we'd increased average nightly occupancy by nearly 30%. Revenue was up significantly, and more importantly, profit margins improved because we weren't constantly dealing with staff turnover and customer complaints. But perhaps the most satisfying part came about 6 weeks after Chad's departure. I was reviewing some customer feedback when I noticed a 1-star review that had been posted recently. The reviewer complained that the restaurant had lost its class and was letting in people who clearly don't belong in such establishments. They specifically mentioned being disappointed that the dress code wasn't being enforced properly. I showed this review to the general manager, and we both had a good laugh. Some people apparently miss the days when restaurants use clothing requirements to exclude people rather than focusing on providing excellent service to anyone willing to pay for it. Even more amusing was when I did some digging and discovered that the negative review had been posted by someone using an account that was clearly fake. The profile had been created just days before the review was posted with no other activity. I had a strong suspicion about who might have created it, though I couldn't prove anything. The contrast with our other recent reviews was stark. We were consistently getting praise for our welcoming atmosphere, exceptional service, and focus on making every customer feel valued. People were specifically mentioning how comfortable they felt dining there, regardless of whether they were celebrating special occasions or just grabbing dinner after work. About 2 months after the acquisition, I decided to make the Sterling Room's transformation official. We held a small reception for staff and regular customers to announce the restaurant's new direction. I gave a brief speech about how hospitality should be about making people feel welcome and appreciated, not about enforcing arbitrary barriers. During that reception, several staff members came up to thank me personally for the changes. One server mentioned that she'd been considering quitting before the acquisition because she was tired of having to apologize to customers for management policies she thought were ridiculous. Now, she said, she actually looked forward to coming to work. The head chef, who'd been with the restaurant for several years, told me that the kitchen staff was more motivated than he'd seen them in years. Without having to worry about uniform policies that made their jobs harder, they could focus entirely on creating exceptional dishes. The quality of the food had improved noticeably, which customers were definitely noticing. But the most satisfying moment came near the end of the reception. The general manager pulled me aside to tell me that he'd received a call earlier that week from someone asking about employment opportunities. Apparently, Chad had been looking for a new job and had called to see if there might be any openings. The general manager said he'd politely explained that there weren't any current openings that would be a good fit, but thanked the caller for their interest. He didn't mention who had called, but we both knew exactly who it was. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Chad had been so convinced that his rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules was what made him valuable as an employee. Now he was discovering that most restaurants in the area had heard about what happened at the Sterling Room, and his reputation for inflexible, customer-hostile management wasn't exactly making him a sought-after candidate. Meanwhile, every member of the staff who had been working under his management was thriving in an environment that valued professionalism, respect, and actual hospitality over performative elitism. The Sterling Room's transformation became something of a case study in our investment group's portfolio. We started applying similar principles to other hospitality businesses we acquired. The lesson was clear. Treating customers and employees with respect and focusing on genuine quality rather than artificial exclusivity was not just morally right, it was also more profitable. 6 months later, the Sterling Room had become one of the most consistently booked restaurants in the city. We'd maintained our reputation for excellent food and elegant atmosphere while completely eliminating the pretentious gatekeeping that had been driving away customers and creating a toxic work environment. I still eat there regularly, usually wearing some variation of the same outfit that got me kicked out that first night. The difference is that now, every staff member knows who I am and treats me with the same professional courtesy they extend to all customers, regardless of what anyone is wearing. Sometimes I think about Chad and wonder if he ever figured out what really happened that night. Probably not. People like him usually convince themselves that they were victims of unfair treatment rather than accepting that their own behavior was the problem. But honestly, I don't spend much time thinking about him anymore. The real victory wasn't getting revenge on one entitled manager. It was transforming a failing business into a thriving one by focusing on what actually matters, treating people well, providing excellent service, and creating an atmosphere where everyone feels welcome. The Sterling Room is now exactly what a high-end restaurant should be. Elegant without being pretentious, professional without being inflexible, and welcoming to anyone who wants to enjoy exceptional food and service. And my $800 sneakers are welcome there anytime. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I used to work as a researcher in an inbound call center. I loved the work and the company was fantastic when I started. But after 4 years, they got bought out by a big international corp. A pretty standard hack and slash corp equal sign, buy up a profitable company, strip it of all assets, cut costs slash quality, make good money until our well-deserved fantastic reputation is destroyed, then sell off and move on. Within weeks, the company went from being fantastic to work for to just yet another crappy, tense work environment where the bosses take advantage of the employees. One quick example of how badly they nerfed the bonus structure. One particular bonus went from being able to earn up to $1,000 extra in 3 days to a single $50 Boston Pizza gift card. Previously, all employees got paid varying bonuses under this scheme, but in the new system, only one person gets the gift card, and they had the nerve to get mad at us when the new slap-in-the-face bonus failed to motivate anyone. I was good at my job, and not to brag, but I was the most productive employee on the floor. We were given 15 PTO, paid time off days, to use every year, which according to our employment contracts and company handbook were to be used for sick days, mental health days, and other personal reasons. No explanation was ever asked for. Use them as and when you will. I always made sure to use up all my PTO by the end of the year as it didn't bank. Previous management encouraged us to do so, and also there was no bonus for not using it. I followed the company rules, always gave plenty of notice, and only once left the team dangling with no notice, as I got seriously ill that time. The new management takes over, and right away they start trying to intimidate us into not taking PTO. I hear a lot of this from my fellow employees, how when they call in, the supervisors have started grilling them, challenging them, saying they don't sound sick, etc. A lot of intimidation and bullying, so by the time I need to use a PTO day, I'm ready. I call in one day and tell them I won't be in tomorrow. They want to know why, so I tell them I'm not feeling well. Their voice grows immediately cold and they get a rude tone. "You don't sound sick to me." Being a smart ass, I said, "Not even doctors try to diagnose illnesses over the phone." But they kept trying to push me. "Can you come in the afternoon? You don't sound sick. You've been using a lot of sick days, way more than other employees." I got tired of being treated like a criminal for obeying the rules, so I got a recording app for my phone. I live in a one-party consent area, so it's perfectly legal to record phone calls. Next time I felt sick, I called into work. Now they always began every call with a disclaimer: "Thank you for calling XXX. For your information, this call may be monitored or recorded for quality purposes." I say hello, give them my name, and say BTW, just so you know on my end this call may be monitored or recorded for quality purposes, because I am recording the call, and I think it's only fair to let them know. The supervisor gives a perfunctory laugh, then says, "So, why are you calling in sick? You don't sound sick to me. I'll put you down as sick for the morning, but you'll be in for the afternoon." I inform them that, no, I am calling in for at least 1 day, and will update if I don't feel better. She says, "No, I'll put you down for half a day. You can call in again if you don't feel better." Once again, I say no, restate my position, and tell them that is that. She gets really pissy and starts insinuating that this might cause me to lose my job. "Why do you take so much more PTO than the other employees?" I take what my employment contract says I am entitled to. No more, no less. "Well, you should have a better team spirit. We'll have to review this with HR." Threatening tone, classical bullying playbook. I'm off the next day. Come in for my following shift. Go see HR. I sit down at Art's desk in HR. He's very much a corporate HR lapdog. He starts going on about how they're going to have to review my employment contract and consider whether or not going forward I am a good fit at TextKix Corp. Now, in case I seem too calm in this scenario, bear in mind that while I do prefer to remain at TextKix for the time being, I do not care if they want to fire me. I'm very good at my job. I have had several job offers from competing companies, so the threat of being fired does not faze me. While Art is berating me, I take out my phone and start playing the recording I made when calling in sick. Art stops, starts to get annoyed, then realizing he's listening to a recording of an employee verbally berating and intimidating a worker for exercising their contractual legal rights. He excuses himself and is gone for about 10 minutes before returning, visibly angry but restrained. He tried to dress me down, scare me, intimidate me into thinking I had violated the law with an illegal recording. I told that, working as I did as a professional researcher, I had, to no surprise, done my research, and single-party consent is all that was required. He shifted gears, starting saying the recording didn't count because the supervisor thought I was joking. I wasn't. "But she thought you were!" And she was wrong, so it doesn't really matter what she thought, Art. I told her the truth. She made a mistake, and recording my own phone conversations is 100% legal and admissible. Art leaves and returns a few minutes later, ever more red-faced. "You can go back to your desk." I did as instructed, and that was all I ever heard again about using my PTO. Whenever I called in from then on, they were always very precise and professional. Their tone was as cold as politicians promise, but that was a lot better than the bullying from before. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened today, and I am rather surprised. You see, I am disabled and I drive. I have a placard and even stickers on my car to mark it as disabled. I even have my spare cane in the car too, in case my usual one has issues. Someone once broke a cane I was using while I was out, so I tend to be over-prepared. Today I was at a local support group for disabled people and parked in a handicapped spot. I put my placard up. Since we have some smokers, the door was unlocked, but some forget and knock anyways. We thought the knocking was one of the people in group that was either late or a smoker, so we invited them in. Instantly, this loud woman came in ranting about a car that sounded like mine, going on and on about how real disabled people need that spot and whoever had that car is not disabled like her. She was demanding it to be moved for a real disabled person like her and for the offender to apologize to her. I sometimes forget to hang up my placard as I can't always get a disabled spot. So I get up and say, I could have sworn I put up my placard. I am sorry that I forgot. I grabbed my keys and started towards the door. The lady ranting followed me as she ranted at me for not being disabled. Couldn't remember it all. She kept saying the same things and I was more focused on double-checking my car. One of the staff that ran the group went with us as they were trying to calm down the lady. Once my car was in view, it had its placard. It was labeled legal. I pointed this out to the lady whom was still yelling at me, which took a couple minutes since she wasn't listening. When she finally listened to me, she didn't believe me and claimed to not see it. The staff member with us pointed it out as well. At this point, the lady said, "Oh, I see. Forget I said anything. I didn't see it. Forget everything." And she ran off. Literally ran off. The staff member and I went back to the disabled support group where everyone told me to forget about that Karen. But honestly, I am worried. If she couldn't see all the markings in and on my car that pretty much screamed disabled, then I am worried about her driving in the first place. So next time I drive to or from my support group, I am going to be more careful, just in case she really had eyes that bad and still drives. The next one is an entitled parent story. It seemed like many were amused by my crazy mother's antics shared in, Mom still complains we named my daughter after mother-in-law 1.5 way later. My mother-in-law is deceased, so here's another funny, ridiculous story from my pregnancy. Disclaimer that this took place almost 2 years ago. My mother is narcissistic and abusive. She pretended to change when we were adults. All that went out the window when during my pregnancy. Everything had to be her way, or she'd scream I was making everything about me, ignoring that she was making everything about her. One thing she demanded early on was a gender reveal. I still don't know why. She and my father didn't have them for my brothers or me. My brothers also wanted a gender reveal. When I asked why, I was told, because they wanted to. I said no. I think they're a bit creepy, TBH. This is not a judgment on people who do have them. I just didn't want one for us. My husband agreed. I offered a compromise to my mom to add pink filters to the ultrasound photos. That wasn't good enough. My mother planned a gender reveal anyway for a weekend I was visiting. I'm about 7 hours from them. And didn't tell me. She planned a virtual party with pink gender reveal decorations. My dad let me know and I was upset. I talked to my mother and she told me she was compromising by doing a virtual gender reveal because I didn't want a party. I told her I appreciated the thought. I was in therapy for family dormantism at the time. But it wasn't something to compromise on because it wasn't wanted. I couldn't even cancel it myself because she didn't tell me who she'd invited. She and my brothers hounded my husband and me, trying to get us to change our minds. Even my dad reached out to ask me to just go along with it to keep the peace. After weeks of this, my mother came to us and meekly said she understood we didn't want it, but that she'd bought some pink poppers on sale. She said it would mean a lot if we could please pop them and take some pictures with just my husband, dad, and brothers when we visited. It was a completely different way than she'd been talking to me. I agreed since I was taken aback, and a few photos for posterity couldn't hurt, right? Plus, she asked so nicely. Well, a week before we were to visit, I was flooded with calls and texts congratulating me on my baby girl. My husband and I had only told immediate family at that point, as I had suffered a late miscarriage previously. My mom had changed the date and had the gender reveal a week early. My husband and I weren't even in the state. She filmed it and sent it to everyone in my family but my husband and me. She also didn't include any of my husband's family, though she had their contact info. I tried to call her, straight to voicemail. 4 hours after sending it to everyone else, she sent the video to me. It features my brothers breaking a piñata. When it explodes in pink powder, my mother says, "That's right, we're having a girl." Then they pop pink poppers. Honestly, I think it's pretty cringy. Finally, she answered me. I asked why TF she had the gender reveal and sent the video without my involvement. She dismissed me and said, "I don't know why you're so upset. You didn't want the gender reveal anyway." Like, yes, that is exactly why I was upset. She stole my pregnancy announcement and specifically did the gender reveal I didn't want and hid it from me. I was so upset I canceled on visiting the following weekend and spent time with my husband's family instead. That's when we agreed to use my Emil's middle name for my daughter, which is covered in the post I mentioned at the beginning. Hopefully you get some enjoyment from this story. I was so upset at the time, but looking back, the absurdity makes me laugh. Anyway, thank you for watching.